Thanks, Jeff. Very interesting information there regarding ransomware. Now, I am seeing some great questions come through from the audience, and I am really looking forward to getting some of them answered. But before we tackle these questions, let's take a look at the fascinating but scary web attacks, toolkits, and how cybercriminals exploited vulnerabilities online. Jeff, what can you tell us?
Apologies, I was on mute there. I thank you for handing back to me. I'd love to talk about this. There's been a distinct shift in the cybersecurity landscape, as I mentioned before, as web attacks actually fell by almost a third compared year on year. This shift involved a move away from exploit kits being used as the primary infection vector to, as we've shown several times already, email being the favorite threat delivery method of attackers. Now, this decline is a distinct contrast with 2015, where the number of web attacks had actually doubled from the previous year. However, despite the drop, web attacks are still a pretty big problem. And since we're in the business of preventing security problems but not allowing them, so Symantec really doesn't have data to offer on the number of web attacks each day. But we can count how many we've blocked each day. On an average, we block nearly 230,000 web attacks every single day, or at least that's what we did in 2016. Now, on one hand, that's good news because that number is a third smaller than the previous year's daily blocks, so things are getting better there. But the bad news is that the percentages of websites which we've scanned contained vulnerabilities, and that percentage that contained vulnerabilities remained at the same high level that it's been at for the last number of years. Our data finds that about 75%, and that varies about 1% either way, contain vulnerabilities. It's very little variation per year. So remember those patches which I mentioned earlier that consumers and organizations keep neglecting? So look, if I didn't make my point earlier, put it this way. Vulnerabilities open the door to attacks. Websites are still a critical element in attacks. They're a way into your company network, a way into your data, and a way to reach your customers and your partners and your employees, which ends up putting them at risk while it puts you and the business you work so hard to make it successful at risk too. We call ourselves website security for a reason, because website security is so much more than mere SSL certificates or encryption or ways to manage SSL certificates. Never before has website security been so critical to your organization's success, much less its very existence. Angelique, take us onward.
Well, no, thanks, Jeff. So where I'm really happy to see that the number of web attacks blocked per day have dropped, I am still quite concerned that the percentage of websites scanned which contain vulnerabilities remained at that same high level. Now, Jeff, what does Symantec predict for the future?
All sorts of things. And actually, before we deliver our recommendations and predictions on how you can use the information in the ISTR to increase your website security, including the usage of SSL certificates for invoking TLS encryption, let's review some of the recommendations, predictions we've made over the past year, since even before our previous year's ISTR. So this is all of 2016 and some of 2015 too. Now, this was announced in 2016, but it was implemented in January 2017. Significant changes to the Firefox and Chrome browsers have effectively required that you assess your website security now, right now, now, as they say where Angelique lives, such that your web pages are not flagged visibly as being not secure. This assessment is in contradiction to the way that website operators have implemented SSL and TLS to date. And that obsolete method was to encrypt data only when it was deemed absolutely crucial to do so. And even then, doing so was more or less optional anyway. You didn't really have to do it. Now, practically speaking, that method typically only used encryption on login pages or when PII or PFI, one I mentioned before, was about to be transmitted across our very public and very scary internet that Angelique was talking about. So what actually has changed? First of all, browsers definitely did their part. They refreshed something that we've been talking about at Symantec for years, and that's the idea of what we call always-on SSL. And this is where the customer's entire experience with your website is encrypted. Every site, every server, every host name, every page, every image, every feed, every frame. Do you get it? Now, as the bottom image shows, if the user's browsing experience can access it, then you should encrypt it. That's the idea of always-on SSL. Now, what the Firefox and Chrome browsers did this past January was to start notifying users with wording and colors and iconography that a web page is, in these words, not secure. Sometimes they put it in red. If such a page asks for a password or a payment card without using SSL or TLS. And with these browser changes, website security is no longer considered a nicety. Rather, website security is now table stakes for organizations of all sizes which have an online presence. There are lots of reasons why this is happening. Of course, on the demand side, governments are now requiring their sites to use HTTPS. And obviously, HTTPS invokes the SSL certificate and its ensuing TLS encryption. And now there's the HTTP2 protocol, which is gaining traction, and it's going to replace the HTTP protocol, which most of the web has used up until now. Moreover, certain search engines, you know, a certain one that starts with G, give a ranking boost of about 5% in our studies to sites, and I stress sites, not pages, sites which use HTTPS in always-on SSL methods instead of just HTTP. Now, on the supply side of things versus the demand side, SSL certificates are super affordable now. Some vendors are even providing complimentary certificates, and I might note that some of these vendors prominently include partners of Symantec. But some CDNs also provide SSL too. And this trend is highly likely to grow. More than 50% of downstream web traffic is now encrypted, and that's expected to grow to beyond 70% in 2017, the year that we're in. Now, we believe that website security starts with encryption, but it does not end there. Just because a website uses HTTPS and encrypts data does not mean that it's actually secure, because a phishing site can use an SSL certificate. And a site can be infected with malware, which means that malware can be pushed to you under the cover of SSL encryption. And that's right past your firewall and scanners in your perimeter. So now to achieve basic, actual, real website security, consider the second function of SSL and TLS. It's not just to encrypt data, but to provide validation that this is the real site, the real server, the real organization that you think it is. It's legitimacy. And only certain SSL certificates, namely organization validation or extended validation, we call them OV and EV certificates, can demonstrate to your site visitors that it's really your site and that you're a legitimate organization or business. Mere encryption cannot do that. There's no way that encryption can do that alone. So sure, I'm going to use this term loosely, let's encrypt all the data, but let's also validate who is real versus who is not. And you don't get that simply through encryption. Luckily, organizations and standards bodies are among those catching onto this idea that without organization validation, encryption is not secure. Angelique?